Welcome! This is my new vlog that I've started, a new podcast called Truth and Dare. It's going to be different material from my first podcast, which I've listed below if you want to watch my first 12 podcasts. They're much more focused on health, exercise, and personal experiences. Like mental health. But this podcast is going to focus on mainly politics, presidents, wars, and histories. And the first one, which goes into some detail on some of these topics, but I'm only going to speak for the first 10 to 15 minutes and introduce those and talk about each one for a very short time. But the first vlog is called Media, or Why Media, and Why Words Matter. Before World War II, there were many left-wing newspapers, and these became fewer and fewer as time went on in the last 50 years, especially after the 1970s. And also, in the 90s, the infamous Rupert Murdoch lobbied the US Congress and the President and the senators to allow him to have cross-ownership of media outlets, for example, newspapers and TV show. And we know what happened after that. He controls this massive right-wing media empire now. And a few other companies like Cox is the third biggest media company in the US. Very right-wing, controls hundreds, if not thousands, of radio stations now. And there are still some left-wing magazines being published on paper and also on the internet. And of course, many podcasts, which appears and will be in the future as the way to get your news. Even though I read 4 newspapers every morning on the internet, I still watch many podcasts every day to get their opinions, and also they do news content that is not available on the newspapers I read. Now, this consolidation is 99%, if not 100%, by right-wing ideologists like Rupert Murdoch. And they want to make you and give you information that only gives you the right-wing perspective on life, politics, health, anything. And of course, it's all propaganda because it doesn't help you at all, because it never gives an alternative viewpoint on anything. And these are all obviously rich white guys. And all they want to do, they talk about this right-wing conservative ideology, but is to simply make more money. And that's what it's all about in the end. And of course, that control is just like 1984, the classic book. Just look at what Elon Musk has done with Twitter since he bought it nearly 2 years ago. He got rid of all the good people to work for it that could give good content, or control it rather. And he has got rid of those, and now he's brought back all those people that were removed off Twitter because of their postings like anti-Semitic and racist postings. Another example is how all media is showing that Biden, even though he's only 4 years older than Trump, his mental gaffes seem to be so much worse than Trump's. And if you ever watch the two guys, Trump's is at least 10 times worse, if not 100 times worse. And yet the media keeps portraying and not being super negative on how stupid Trump is and how you can never understand what he's saying. His mental cognitive collapses are like classic. He is already nuts. People are saying that because they think because Trump's language is so much more colourful and he does that stupid dance jig anywhere and the language he uses, and he gets emotional. I mean, why would you want someone like that as the next president anyway? The last vestige of left-leaning news is only found on a handful of radio stations. And they are NPR, National Public Radio, and many college radio stations. They are really the only ones left on public airways, whether it's TV or whatever. Now, the next items I'm going to talk about briefly are 12, in fact a total of 14 examples of how the media has totally failed us, unapologetically, pathetically, and unabashedly over the last 50 years. But also the same applies to any media in any country around the world. And all these examples I'm going to give are from the USA. I lived there for 33 years and now live in Vietnam for 10 years. And I make reference to one Australian Prime Minister from the 70s a couple of times. Now, the first one is from Jon Stewart's podcast, Mainstream Media, and of course how it's failed us. And as you know, he's quite a comedian. I think he's the best podcaster out there and the best interviewer out there. And he did a show on how all media, especially the non-right media, is trying to suck up to you and make themselves look like they are so smart, so democratic, and give points of view that you will like and trust them. But as Jon Stewart showed, they are a laughing stock also. And these are the talking points from the non-right-wing media, like MSNBC. I'll read them out. Truth to power. Knowing empowers us. Knowing helps us decide. Knowing keeps us free. Democracy dies in darkness. Bigger than Watergate. If it's true. Walls closing in. Bombshell. And these are all the highlights, talking points, catchphrases about the Mueller report. That was before the report came out. And what a disaster the Mueller report was. And I actually talk about it in one of these 14 items. The next item is, I just referenced two great podcasters. If you want to learn about the truth, about a lot of topics, and how it's done, should be done. And also, I mentioned a Guardian, the English newspaper, an article that was written a week or so ago on the political landscape in San Francisco for the mayor's race. And I found it extremely well written, one of the best articles I've read in a long time on the internet by a major newspaper. The next item I've called, do not go against the establishment. Doing so, you do at your life's peril and or your family's peril. Charles Lindbergh Sr. was a senator from around 1913, I believe, to the 1935. And in 1919, he started talking about the Reserve Bank and how it was a private institution, not government control, not any government control. The government cannot even put the governors on the board. And he talked very negatively about positively about changing it, and had only negative things to say about the Reserve Board because they simply had too much control over our lives and about things like interest rates. Then lo and behold, in the early 1930s, before he retired, and which may have caused his retirement, was that his grandson, Charles Lindbergh's son, they're all named Charles Lindbergh, the great aviator, was going to run for president. And his son got kidnapped and disappeared and was finally found dead a few months later. And that was the end of Charles Lindbergh's presidential run. The second one on this do it at your life's peril is a journalist called Gary Webb. If you're as old as I am, you may have recalled, he was a journalist from the San Jose Bee, and he broke the story on how the CIA brought crack cocaine into South Central LA in the 1980s. And when his story came out in the early 90s, there was a lot of congressional hearings, but in classic American political judicial fashion, no one went to jail. And apparently he was going to break another story, but sadly he was found hanged in his room, and they attributed that to suicide. I don't think so. The next person is a guy called J.H. Hatfield, and he was the author of a book about G.W. Bush's cocaine habits in university and probably afterwards. And there was a lot of hullabaloo about it, of course, but the major news medias kept right away from it. And every time George Bush was asked a question about it, he totally diverted the question or the answer, so he never answered it directly. And of course, the media wouldn't go anywhere near the story. Even though there's a few articles written, given to major publications, but no one printed the story like it should have been at that time. The next item is the same person, the Bush Cocaine Chronicles, and how the media did cover it up. The next item I've also mentioned, the Mueller report, but I focus on his lack of in-depth analysis of what really happened between the Russians and Trump. He totally shied away from it, and his qualifications, in my opinion, he should never have been allowed to do it. If you look at his record in the CIA before this, he destroyed the CIA and what it should have done, which was focus on domestic terrorism, and there was 2 major incidents on his watch because he focused on international terrorism. The next one is the Iran-Contra affair. As you may recall, it had to do with Ronald Reagan and G.W. H. Bush, raising money by selling arms to Iran and using that money to support the right-wing paramilitary groups in Central America for like 10 years. Everything totally illegal, and they finally owned up to it right at the end of it because they had the hearings, two of the main army players got convicted and went to jail, but of course they were pardoned. God forbid. The first item is under G.W.H. Bush again, the first Iraq War, the reasons for the first invasion. It wasn't written a lot about, but somewhat. Saddam Hussein complained a lot about Kuwait drilling laterally into this major oil field that was on his country's property. In other words, across an international border. And he went in there because he had a lot of debts, and a lot of debts to the US also, and to Kuwait, because Kuwait loaned him a lot of money to fight the 10-year war with Iran. The UN told him to get out of Kuwait, and he refused. So of course the UN passed a resolution, and basically America invaded it, and that was how they stopped him. The next item is the general at that time, Schwarzkopf, and I repeat a story that I read at that time, paraphrasing of course, how he allowed in his final act as the general commander in that invasion of allowing gunships, helicopters with large machine guns, to patrol Iraq. What this allowed was the mowing down, murder, killing of any insurgents, anyone against, or any demonstrations against Saddam Hussein's rule. The next one is another general, General Colin Powell. He was the Secretary of State under George W. Bush, and of course we know he invaded Afghanistan and Iraq again. It seems like the two primary reasons, I think, was he wanted the approval, a pat on the head by his father, because his father didn't complete the mission. And the second, of course, is that his vice president had a slight mental relapse. Dick Cheney, the one and only, one of the greatest assholes of our time. He quit his CEO job at a subsidiary of Halliburton. Guess which contractor got the most contracts to restore all and any part of the oil industry in Iraq? Halliburton. They made hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe even more than $1 billion, $2 billion, who knows. As we know, $2 billion disappeared in the funding of that illegal invasion. And anyway, going back to Colin Powell, his infamous speech in front of the UN, where he claimed that some photograph with these metal tubes were part of a nuclear reactor design, and therefore Saddam was going to build a nuclear bomb. I mean, only a moron could ever believe any of that. And also my next item is about George W. Bush and the invasion of Iraq the second time. His lies, lies, and more lies. Where was the media? God forbid. The New York Times totally supported it. Good idea. Let's go and kill 1 million Iraqis because we think they may develop or have weapons of mass destruction. My favorite ad during that time was the nuclear explosion with that mushroom cloud. I mean, the gullibility of the Western population today is beyond belief. And the final two is about Barack Obama. The first is how many people he killed because of his drone war policy. Thousands. And how many bad guys did he kill? Maybe 1% of the thousands of the people he killed. Maybe he got 10 people that were the bad guys. But he had to kill 100,000 people to get these 10 bad guys. The media coverage at that time was absolutely disgusting. And then finally, how Barack Obama completely failed in his duties as a president to force Mitch McConnell in 1998 to appoint the Supreme Court Justice. And Obama didn't fight almost at all to force McConnell, who used the filibuster rule again and again and again to prevent the vote coming to the floor. And that led, during the last month of Trump's presidency, of the third person that Trump appointed to the Supreme Court, because Mitch McConnell's had the balls in, because he knew no one would complain the way he was appointing Supreme Court justices. So instead of having a 5-4 Supreme Court to the left, we've ended up with a 6-3 Supreme Court to the right. And we know all the ramifications of that, let alone the abortion issue, and now they're hearing the case against the Trump has filed to get complete immunity for anything he may have done while president, or he could do in the future. So this is my conclusion. There has never been a total left media news outlet ever on major media, government-controlled airways, cable. Never. At least since the 1970s, for the last 50 years, they've all gravitated to the center and absolutely to the right. Just look at CNN hosting Trump a few months ago. What a pathetic interview. And this is supposed to be one of our premier cable TV stations. The only place that exists on the internet, left-wing opinions, statistics, arguments, interviewers, through podcasts. And quite a number of web pages now that people have opened and are giving us real information in real time of what's going on around the world, and of course within, hopefully, trying to get information within governments. The left-leaning news does not exist, and the right-wing news and people in governments have been giving us this motto logo, and it's been an absolutely complete lie, because I've never seen it. Thanks for that. Now I'm going to scroll through all my notes on this topic, and you can watch it at your leisure. Thank you for listening to me. Hi, I came back. I changed my mind. My notes you'll be able to access them in the following video. Not the same video. It reduces the length of the video, and it will be in a YouTube format. You just have to click it. It'll be the same name. Media Failures, 50 years. So I hope if you're interested in looking at all the notes and the references, you can find them there. Thank you.